just get organised. One minute. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting. And I'm pleased to see that we're quorate. Difficult meeting. Quite a few people are away, and it's half term for some as well, which is unfortunate. Item 1 on the agenda is to receive any apologies for absence. Do you have any?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First of all, your apologies from your Honorary Clerk Graham Farrant and Councillors Adams, Armstrong, Beasley, Olivia Brown, Challoner, Connolly, Dove, Edwards, Hannah, Northover, Rigby, Trent and Wilson.
Has anybody else got any apologies? Richard?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite catch. Did you say David Brown? Because if not, could he send his apologies as well, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll add that to the list. Thank you.
It is unfortunate. I don't know whether, I know these meetings are in the diary, but half term is a difficult time for a lot of people. I wonder if it's something we can consider if these meetings are always going to, because they've done that before, haven't they? The meetings been at a time which is really different. With some schools have got half term next week, and some have got them this week. I know Councillor Dove told me that her children were on half term. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of interest. Has anybody got a declaration of interest? No? We'll move on to item 3, which is confirmation of the minutes and matters arising. Has everybody seen a copy of the minutes? Any matters arising? So can we accept that they are correct?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 4 on the agenda is my communications, and I've got a few things to tell you. I've been quite busy in a very different way than I would have imagined and than it ever has been before. I think that lockdown has changed. I mean, quite a few people here haven't been councillors before, so won't know what it was like before. But it's more, I think the way it is now, it's changed since lockdown. And I think it's more positive and I think it's more purposeful. But it's not quite so much entertaining involved. So, not me entertaining, but being entertained. And I think that's correct. I think it's the right way. In the past, the mayor would be invited to numerous dinners and functions and all sorts of things, which were costly for the organisers, but they sort of felt they had to do it. Every society in Bournemouth used to have an annual dinner. So I've been involved much more with community events, which has been an absolute eye-opener. Really interesting. Someone who grew up in a town which was, well, went to sleep in the winter, and the only excitement we ever had is, I don't think there's any other Bournemouth people in this room, though I'm not absolutely sure. The big excitement was when the foreign students came in the summer, and they were the people of difference. When the French, the corner of the square which leads into the gardens was known as French Corner, and used to have the smell of Gauloise cigarettes, and for the whole summer we were excited. It was wonderful. And then following them came the Italians, and then that was that for the year. Well, now I've just had the most amazing few months, particularly with communities. This afternoon I was at a Black History Month event, and there were people from every country in Africa there, countries I didn't even know the name of, and from many other places throughout the world, and people from the Indian subcontinent. But I've just made a note that I've been to a lot of events from people from the Indian subcontinent, whether it's whichever country it might be. They're very proactive in our community. They do an awful lot. They do an awful lot for within their own community and outside it, and they're really happy to have the mayor come along. They appreciate a bit of bling, and they love to see the chains, but apart from that, they're grateful for the acknowledgement, and I'm really pleased to go there. I've been to a couple of Portuguese events. Kushti Bok was the Gypsies and Travellers event, which commemorated a massacre that had taken place, and that was at Kingston Moorwood College. For anyone who's never been there, and I'd never been there before, it's the most amazing place, and it was a wonderful event. I think it's annual, and if you get an opportunity to go, because it was very interesting. I've been with the Jewish community. Last Saturday night, I was invited to what I thought was a church service with the Nigerian community to commemorate independence. And it was in a church, but it certainly wasn't a church service. It was the most amazing, vibrant, noisy dinner with loads of people and loads of food and loads of children, and the costumes were just fabulous. It was an eye-opener. It was the most wonderful event, and I was really proud to support them. And also the communities of people, I don't really know how to say it, of difference. So I've been to a few events with people with varying disabilities which have been held. A tennis tournament for adults with learning disabilities, which is run every week at the Southbourne Tennis Club. Most amazing, and the participants were so thrilled with the badge that I was able to put around their neck. The tennis wasn't Wimbledon standard, to put it mildly. Not many people could hit the ball, but that didn't really matter at all because the exuberance was absolutely amazing. I've also done a lot with the armed forces. Bournemouth, for those who don't know, has given the freedom of Bournemouth to the Royal Hampshire Regiment. And although it doesn't exist anymore, it's now part of the Rifles. I've been to a bugle breakfast. As you go down Wallisdown Road, going out of Bournemouth, on the left-hand side, just before you get to the end, where you would turn left to go to Camford Heath, I've passed it a million times. There's the Royal Hampshire Regiments, or the Rifles headquarters. I had no idea it was there. Absolutely amazing building, and they put on a breakfast when they explain an awful lot about what they do, particularly charitable work that they do. The Sea Cadets are very active and very impressive. They meet 3 or 4 times a week on the entrance to the football ground in Kings Park. As you go up Gloucester Road, on the left-hand side, just before you get into the park, there's this their headquarters, and it's sort of like scouts or guides. There's lots of girls, without the guides and scouts mottos and religious aspect to it. They've got the kids, and it's a recruitment exercise, I'm sure, but the kids do very purposeful stuff and learn an awful lot and learn to be leaders. Young children are sort of become officers and, really are impressive. I've loved that. And I've got an exciting event coming up in about 3 or 4 weeks, which I'll tell you about next time, when I and the Mayor of Christchurch, who've also given the freedom of the borough to the Rifles, are invited to the Guildhall in London for their annual dinner, and that's with the King and Queen and other members of the royal family. And it's going to be very exciting. Unfortunately, my husband is not allowed to come, because they've got enough people there already. But it's the sort of thing we do with the armed forces. Apart from that, the charitable work, which I'd love you, please, to put out, that I've been to some things. Hope FM radio have got a most amazing project. I know some people know about it, called Grounded. And they've got gardens. Well, they've got a garden behind St Clement's Church, which is sort of between Boscombe and Springbourne. A big garden. It used to be the garden of the vicarage and the garden of the church. And they've got, it's more than an allotment. They've got a huge growing area, and they grow a huge amount of food from volunteers, and they give it out. I mean, I've lived in Boscombe all my life. I had no idea it was there. Beautiful. And they also run, on top of the shopping centre in Boscombe, the Sovereign Centre, 50 or 60 beehives, which we went up on the roof, and there's these beehives and bees buzzing in and out, and I mean, just amazing. And then they produce honey, and they sell it, or they give it, and they've got it's not the food bank, but it's sort of like it. They go around all the bakers every night, the fresh goods, which won't last, and they give away the bread the next day. They're just a most amazing project. And they also go around to people who've got big gardens, perhaps with fruit trees in the gardens or anything at all, and they'll collect the fruit and make it into pies and give it away. So it's not the food bank, it's something completely different, but this is called Hope Grounded Project, and it's something worth supporting. I went to the Poverty Truth Commission, which I think I mentioned in full council. That was really good. And Councillor Felicity Rice, who's not a Charter Trustee, was one of the organisers. And it's based in Charminster, and it's helping people to help themselves, so that people aren't just recipients, they're helping to give back what they're receiving. But there's so many people in need, and it's not just food, it's also they need of advice and help. And so many people have been brought on, but it's the most people who've lived in poverty have helped themselves out of poverty. I loved it. It was a most amazing day. I went to a Coast Watch annual service. There's a group of volunteers who work as unpaid coast guards and sit in a little hut on the top of Hengistbury Head, day in, day out, day in, day out. And they have an annual service at the end of Hengistbury Head in that little church. And this was dedicated to the 2 young people who lost their lives in Bournemouth in the summer. And it was so impressive. These volunteers, I mean, they love it. They do love it, and they've formed a wonderful group. But they do a really fantastic job because they're supporting the Coast Guard, and there's so many people get into trouble between Hengistbury Head and the Needles, and I was very impressed with that. Lots to do with the Arts University and the Bournemouth University, who also do a fantastic job within the community. They've got a community arm, and the Students' Union, who do a lot. I know Lawrence has been mayor, and I think he's nodding away, and other people here who know. They do a lot for the community and within the community, and they've got some fantastically talented young people. And if only we could keep some of that talent here, we would be the most amazing town. They want to stay. These young people often love it here and would love to stay, but they haven't got a hub for their creativity. So it's something we should all think about if we can do anything. And apart from that, there were a lot of festivals in the summer. The World of Love. I don't know if anyone went to the World of Love festival in Kings Park. I was a bit doubtful about what I was going to see when I got there. No idea. But actually, it's all the different communities from the Far East all the way along had stalls and put on music and put on dance events, and it was beautifully run by a group of people who come from somewhere in Eastern Europe, I'm not sure. But it was something I've never been to, and it was such a worthwhile event. It'll be on again next year, and it's something to go to because it was colourful and wonderful. So it's just been an interesting time, interesting and varied, and just great. And thank you very much for putting me in this position to be able to do those things. I feel privileged, but I also feel it's my job and position to make sure other people know about these things, especially things like Grounded, because they deserve our report, and they'll be good for all our residents can benefit from the work that they do. So that's the end of my community. I'm not going into details of day by day. It would be very boring, but I hope it gave you a general flavour of the sort of things that the Mayor's been doing. So item 5 on the agenda is the report of the Civic Working Group. And in the absence of Councillor Beasley, I'm going to ask Councillor Williams if he will present this report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We met on the 7th of September, as you know, and we've got 3 recommendations to bring to this body. I'll read all 3 of them one at a time, and perhaps if there are any debates to be had. We can discuss each one as we go along. The first one is the Charter Trustee debate. Resolve a proposal to change the civic term to serving as Deputy Mayor first and the Mayor in the subsequent year. Does anybody want to discuss that, or can we? Yes. Councillor Ranton.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering why this is being proposed. I'd just like to know a little bit more about it. It seems that, and although the report says it's in line with Christchurch, it's out of step with Poole, and my opinion is that the role of the Deputy Mayor is to support the Mayor. Therefore, the good person going into the Deputy Mayor role is able to use their skills and experience and knowledge to support the Mayor, the incoming Mayor, which they wouldn't be able to do if it was the other way around. So I'd like to find out a bit more. Thank you.
Maybe I'll answer first, if I may. I can tell you from experience, I was the Mayor of Bournemouth in 2017, and I would have welcomed having been the Deputy Mayor first, because it would have given me the chance to observe and probably take note, because there's very little time lapse between being made the Mayor and actually being the Mayor at the moment, and it's all about learning the job. So I think the year is really useful. I don't know if the Deputy Mayor can add to that himself and whether he agrees with it or not, but I firmly believe it's the right way around. But that's what the recommendation was. I don't know if anybody wants to add to that.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I too had the same issue that Councillor Rampton had. The main issue I've got is that if somebody in their last year as a councillor wishes to stand for Mayor, they would not be able to, because they would not have stood the year before. And I think that that could exclude somebody from that option, should somebody so wish. Not speaking personally, of course, but one never knows, does one? Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Actually sitting in a seat and actually doing the role, I can see both sides of the discussion. In direct answer to Karen's question, it came up as a proposal because this was an unusual event in the formation of BCP, and in fact for the borough of Bournemouth as it was, in that both the mayor-elect and the deputy mayor didn't get re-elected, so we had to scramble, and I say we, that's a collective we for the office of the mayor, to adjust the protocol to allow for the, in this particular case, a previous mayor to step up and a deputy mayor to understudy, as it were. I've always found it strange, long before I was a councillor, that it's deputy mayor and then, it's mayor then deputy mayor, simply because my background is one where you learn the job of the one above you and teach your job to the one below. Having done the role, the greater majority of the role for a deputy mayor I've found is to actually not to be the understudy, but to actually take up the slack for any engagements that the mayor may wish to do. So therefore, you have an opportunity to represent the office of the mayor as a deputy mayor without actually being the mayor. I'm not explaining that very well, but essentially what it is, for an answer to Lawrence's point, is that's where you learn on the job. So I myself personally don't have a concern about changing it to be deputy mayor and then mayor-elect. And I think Stephen has brought a really good point, whereby if somebody did wish to put themselves forward to be considered to be elected for the mayor in their final year of their term, for whatever reason, then they would be excluded because the Constitution has changed. So the reason it's here for and up for debate is simply because there is an opportunity, and it's based upon the circumstances that we found ourselves due to the election earlier this year.
Does anybody else want to speak? Thank you, Sharon. Councillor.
I just wanted to point out that if somebody wanted to be mayor in their last year of their term of office, they could simply apply to be deputy mayor the year before.
Well, absolutely, that's a valid point, but it doesn't occur to us all to plan our civic career out in such a way. I'm a case in point. The other thing which I wanted to raise is that it was quite amusing in the Civic Working Party, where I'm a member, ex officio due to my role as deputy mayor, is that it's a try before you buy. If you become a deputy mayor, you may well say, not for me. The engagements are too many, the demands is too much. So the point which is in the paper that the trustees would know who they were getting for the following year is null and void. The other side of the flip coin, which was amusing to me, was that it's a try before you buy, so that the trustees themselves can go, not really keen on them as a deputy mayor, perhaps we won't elect them to be mayor the following year. So then we might have a constitutional question, because it is an elected role. So again, in answer to Sharon's point, is that from my experience, I wouldn't support it, because I think the way that it's working just fine is actually the experience of being a mayor straight out of the starting blocks is sufficient in itself for you to blossom into that particular role and bring your own particular qualities to that role, rather than being an understudy to say, well, that's how I'll be the mayor the following year, and then to support that fresh face or that fresh mayor that's coming in as the role of the deputy mayor, as I said, to actually fulfil the many, many engagements, unfortunately, that the mayor has to turn down because they cannot be in the two places at once. Thank you very much.
So if I might be allowed to say something, I've listened to all the points, and they're all valid. I'm just going to ask someone who knows more than I do I know that Paul has a sheriff who steps up and becomes a mayor, and then there's a deputy mayor afterwards. We don't have that. We don't have that luxury here of having three people, because we don't have a sheriff in Bournemouth. But so virtually, the sheriff is sort of the role of understudy to the mayor, or could be, or maybe people who know more than me are shaking their heads. There's something about coming fresh as mayor without any preconceptions, which is very exciting. So all those events that I told you come to you as a blast, and it's really amazing. On the other hand, not everybody's confident and capable, and it can take a few months to get used to being sort of walking around with chains and having. This afternoon I arrived at a function where I didn't think I was going to be doing anything, and then I was asked to not speak for more than 10 minutes. So that sort of thing is thrown at you, and it can be quite daunting, and we want everybody to feel capable of standing for the mayoralty. So for that, the idea of sort of being an understudy is good, but it perhaps takes the guilt off it afterwards. I'm easy on this, and I'll be happy to be guided by other people's opinions, but perhaps I could ask Richard Jones to explain how it's done in Paul and whether this would work or whether it wouldn't.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think there's probably members in the room that will probably be better positioned to actually answer the issues around the history of Paul. But you're right, the sheriff is elected, and the sheriff then traditionally, unless they lose their seat, progress to be the mayor, and then the mayor will then progress to be the deputy mayor the following year. So it's a 3-year rolling programme. Just to clarify, this was an item of debate at the working group. It was finally balanced. This is not being brought by officers, so we're not pushing for this issue. It's been raised by members for you to discuss here tonight and determine whether you wish to change it or not. I think one pro probably that isn't in the, if we're going to look at the cons and the pros, one benefit of knowing who the incumbent mayor is going to be is to better celebrate that, get invitations out. Whereas if you, at the moment, we have an election for mayor each year, and whilst it's usually uncontested, there could be a contest in that election, and therefore making the preparations for the celebration, the hospitality and so on that goes with that, it can be difficult. But it's finely balanced. It's really for members to determine whether they wish to leave the arrangements as they are, with the mayor becoming deputy mayor, or switch it around for the deputy mayor to be elected first and then become the mayor. So it is finely balanced, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Just as somebody who's a member of the Charter Trust of Bournemouth and Poole, and also a member of the working group, and yes, you are right, it was debated and there's pros and cons for both. Just to point out that the sheriff for Poole is quite a different role in that, if I'm correct, the sheriff cannot attend meetings without the mayor. The sheriff is only there to protect the mayor, therefore isn't acting as a deputy. The deputy follows afterwards, as it does here.
That is correct. Thank you.
So, if there are no more debate, I'll put the matter to the group, and I know it's going to be really difficult for people who haven't got much experience. We're going to have to listen to what was said, and we either leave it as it is, or we accept the item on the agenda. Before I do you want to sum up at all, Councillor Williams?
I think I've said what I wanted to at the beginning. I mean, like you, I don't mind one way or the other. It worked for me being mayor first, and it's worked for you being mayor first, but it doesn't probably work for everybody that way. We're all different individuals, all different people, and the results of the vote will lead us to where we're going. Thank you. So, can I suggest we have a vote on it?
So, anybody else want to speak? So, if I can put the matter to the Assembly, all those in favour of changing it so that we would have the civic term would serve as deputy mayor first and mayor subsequently, could you raise your hands? And hands down. And those who would be against doing that, could you raise your hands?
No, I think that was, so that's lost. So we're
So that item is lost, and so we stick with the status quo.
Absolutely, Madam Mayor. You don't need to take another vote. You've voted not to change the arrangements, so we will leave the arrangements the same.
Do we need to take that vote?
No, you don't.
No, thank you. So, Councillor Williams, the second item B, please.
Yes, of course. The Charter Trustees agreed in principle to the provision of an annual allowance for the Mayor and Deputy Mayor to be brought forward to the January budget meeting for confirmation. And again, I think a debate probably is quite useful. Up until now, we've been allowed as mayors to make claims, which is a bit cumbersome. You put your claim in at the end of the month. This gives us the opportunity to give the mayor the budget, as it were, for the year on a month-by-month basis. But I think maybe others can explain it better, and if there's a debate to be had, let's have the debate. Thank you.
I wonder if we could just be reminded what the situation is at the moment. There's an allowance of some sort now, but perhaps you could explain how it is now, and then we can have a sensible debate.
Indeed, Madam Mayor, there's, your budget has a number of rows in it, so there's rows in there around hospitality, there's an out-of-pocket expenses budget provision, and expenses that you incur or the mayor incurs can be recouped from that arrangement. Just to roll back slightly, so before the Charter Trustees were established and it was Bournemouth Borough Council, the mayor was the first citizen elected to run council meetings and could have attracted an SRA, as the current chair of BCP is entitled to an SRA. Under the Charter Trustees, they operate slightly differently, and we haven't introduced that equivalent allowance. It's not called an SRA, but that equivalent allowance. You'll see in the report that the Charter Trustee Regulations 2009 do allow for Charter Trustees. They may make a payment to the mayor and the deputy mayor, such allowance as they think reasonable for the purposes now of carrying out that duty. Now, we're not. I think here is we're seeking the principle of whether or not you support the payment of an allowance to the member. That allowance would be paid very similar to the SRAs and the member and your basic allowances that you get as BCP Council. They would be divided by 12 if you agreed as a total sum, divided by 12 and paid on a monthly basis. That would then replace the out-of-pocket. I think the intention was that would replace the out-of-pocket expenses that may then be claimed, which can be time-consuming. Clearly, as an administrative process to administering those claims. It requires receipts. It's more of a administrative process, whereas the allowance would replace that and be an allowance that would be payable to the mayor and potentially the deputy mayor if you wish to.
Just before I open it for debate, can I ask, if we were to do this, how do the figures balance? What is the current allowance? Is there a limit at the moment? And would the SRA be the equivalent of what it is now? And then I'll do an explanation after that. And also, would it be a charge? Would it add anything in any way to our budgets or to the taxpayer?
Yeah, and again, I think that would depend on the amount that, if you were to agree it. So this evening is, would you like us to go away and do some more work in terms of the amount that may be payable? Just to give you some figures, though, that we have. So the answer to your question is, if you increase the bottom line total cost to the Charter Trustees, then yes, there would be potentially an increase, or that you could remove that from reserves. But in principle, yes, if you were increasing without changing any other budget headings, the introduction of an allowance, then yes, there would be a potential additional charge. But just to give you some figures in terms of the current lines in the budget, the hospitality budget is currently set at £12,000. We've been well underspent on that particular budget line over recent years. The out-of-pocket expenses line, I'm just trying to find it, is £2,000, and again, we've been underspent on that over recent years. So I think if you were to agree a principle, we could go away, and if your principle was that there would be no over total budget increase, for instance, then we could go and work on those figures.
Just before we do open it for debate, I'd just like to explain how this arose. I was not expecting to be mayor this year, as most of you know, and we've had 2 or 3 years of lockdown when I have worn nothing but trainers, tracksuits, and for an odd meeting I've put on something a bit posher, but actually, like many of us, that's how it's been. And the mayoralty is something very different. I'm in a fortunate position that I can afford to buy clothes and things, but if they're specifically for the mayoralty, and gentlemen, I'm sorry about this, but the ladies will understand, I had to buy shoes. I don't normally wear shoes. I do wear sandals and I wear trainers and a pair of boots in the winter, but I'm not a shoey person. I had to buy a couple of pairs of slightly smarter shoes for attending some of these many functions that I went to. And that was fine. It's accepted. What you do is you put in you buy the shoes and you put in a chitty, and then the money's repaid for necessities. I'm going to this Guildhall dinner in London. I have to have a long dress. I do not have a long dress, and the King's going to be there. I'm not going to go and buy one from Dior, but nonetheless, these things have to be done, and not all mayors are going to be in the same position or to be able to afford to do those things. So there were expenses. So I bought these pair of shoes back in May, which I needed, a pair of posh shoes, which was not easy to come by because lots of people are not buying shoes. And in goes my chitty. They were not expensive, I think they were about £70. And that has to be processed by my team, by Hazel and Hazel and Carolyn, and they have to look at it, and then they have to submit it to the budget signatories, who are 2 councillors, and they have to agree it, and they needed to see a receipt. And I had a credit card receipt, but not a shop receipt. So they weren't happy to agree this pair of £70 shoes, and I had to go back to the shop, and it was too late. It was a couple of months later, and they didn't have any record of their receipt. They didn't keep their receipts. This is all very arcane. I'm really sorry about it. So this, you know, it's a bit embarrassing. It's a bit awkward. I don't imagine there's going to be many mayors who will be living it up on an allowance, but most of us have a special responsibility allowance if we're chair or vice chair of a big committee and chair of any committee. And I think that the way things are at the moment, to preserve the integrity, and it's also very time consuming for the team. You know, and then they have to transfer money into the. It's really time consuming. It was a shock to see how difficult it was. Gentlemen, if you become mayor, you will need to have at least one decent suit and a decent jacket. Well, you know, today we live a different life. Not everybody's got those things. Not everybody wants them. We live in a different world, and I think it would be much kinder and more sensible to have a budget which isn't a lavish one, but a budget that the mayor can use to buy the things they need, and if there's anything left over at the end and they feel so inclined, they can give it back. They don't have to spend it down to the last penny, and I think that's the way it should be done. So I'm going to open it for debate now. Mr. Jones wants to say something.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just to add to what you said as well, I think an allowance would be more inclusive. We talked earlier on about members maybe wishing to stand for mayor, and actually I think an allowance scheme, an allowance arrangement is probably more inclusive, where you don't have to submit claims for things you perhaps don't have in your possession, and it's up to the member or the mayor to then decide what they wish to spend that allowance on, or as you said, if they don't wish to take that up, they can forego the allowance or return any surplus at the end of the year.
Have we any opinions?
Madam Chair, may I ask a point of clarification? If you make this an annual allowance, am I right in thinking that it therefore becomes subject to income tax, whereas if you pay out-of-pocket expenses, it doesn't?
I'll ask somebody who knows more than I do to answer that question.
For you, Madam Mayor, yes, it would be subject to income tax, so it would have to go through, just hearing the idea now, it would have to probably go through the council's payroll process, which may actually come at an additional cost to the Charter Trustees as well. Just something to pick up. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Sharon.
May I ask if there's a history of there being a problem with expenses? I don't mean the actual process of it, perhaps that could do with some finessing, but whether they are generally paid and agreed without any trouble.
Could one of the officers answer that for me?
For you, Madam Mayor, not that I'm aware of, no, it's not been an issue that I've seen at the council, my time working for Charter Trustees.
Can I just ask, do we have records of how much expenses have been paid out for this in the past 2 or 3 years that we can refer to, so we have some kind of standard that we can use?
Madam Mayor, it's been quite a strange few years, to be fair, with COVID, so I wouldn't necessarily say that they are the benchmark. I think what we're looking for here is whether you are seeking a principle in that. I think those sorts of questions we would then go away and look at what those expenses claims have been over the last few years. and possibly before then as well in terms of as Bournemouth Borough Council. I think it's the principal issue we're looking for here. We haven't necessarily got all of those answers at this point.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a few questions, if I may, mainly for clarification. I think, Ms Jones, you said that the allowance would be equivalent to an SRA, and are you meaning the councillor basic SRA of 13,000? No? Or what are you...
Forgive me, I was simply saying that it would be paid in a similar way to
similar
that.
Way,
So
okay.
whatever that, I'm not suggesting it's going to be anything like that. No,
Okay.
absolutely.
So I was wondering if you said it would replace out-of-pocket expenses, and you also mentioned hospitality. So would it be an allowance instead of hospitality and out-of-pocket, or would the hospitality budget still be there, but the out-of-pocket expenses wouldn't be? And frankly, I couldn't possibly agree to something going forward in principle if I didn't know what the allowance was going to be. Would it be the same for the mayor and the deputy mayor, or would it be one that they would kind of adjust between themselves? How would that work? I think there's a sort of fairly generous allowance, isn't there? Out-of-pocket expenses, 2,000. I think it's 1,000 in Poole, and I don't see why there would be a difference between the two towns. And there's also supplies and services, uniform and clothing of £200. Is that for the chauffeurs rather than for the mayor and deputy mayor? Or does that cover... I don't think it's the mayor.
That is for staffing.
That's for staffing.
Provision,
Okay,
yes.
yeah, that's absolutely fine. In terms of claiming back, I don't really think for those people who, and I don't, but for those people who claim travel expenses, etc., I don't think it's anything different to what anybody else has to do in terms of claiming. And I also think, and forgive me for this, but I think it's quite a privilege to be deputy mayor or mayor, and I think you go into it, hopefully with your eyes open, knowing that you will have to have, a decent outfit, and some people may choose to borrow or go to a charity shop and kit themselves out that way. So I'd be interested to know the answer to how much the allowance would be, but I am not at this moment supportive of it going forward. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to speak? Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I would be quite supportive of it because I just think it would be more inclusive. Because if somebody gets voted in as mayor and they haven't got a lot of extra cash, £70 is a lot to spend on a pair of shoes and not get your money back for 2 or 3 weeks. Have to put your expenses in first. And I just think it would just make it more inclusive. Not only that, actually, but there are incidental expenses that you don't think of. It's not just buying the shoes, it's the petrol to get there, it's the parking, it's and having to return them and things like that, having to go back. So I think it will cover also all those sorts of things. So I would be in favour of it for that reason.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry, this is a really awkward position for those of us that are kind of over, 6-foot-ish. I'm generally supportive of the allowance and its inclusivity. I suppose the concern is there a mechanism to kind of recall the mayor if they just kind of take the money and run and stop turning up to civic events and things like that? Thanks.
Just before I ask anybody else to speak, I was focusing a lot on a pair of shoes, but it's more than a pair of shoes. There's an awful lot of expense involved. And it's the inclusivity that, I am in a position where I'm not worried about a pair of shoes. The principle I might have been worried about, but the principle of allowing anybody, when it was Bournemouth Borough Council, anybody and everybody could become mayor, and did. There were people of means and people who were not of means, and people who'd served this borough for a long time and became eligible to become mayor were enabled to do so because they knew that there was a proper allowance that enabled them to do that. And I think the idea of personally, I think the idea of going to a charity shop and picking up a few bits is not on. It is a privilege to be mayor, but it's also a privilege to represent the town when you go to functions in a proper manner. And it wouldn't be a privilege to the people organising charities and functions if you rolled up in a crumpled old pair of trousers and a sweater. No one would want to do that, not if they're wearing the chains. So I think that, but on the other hand, I certainly don't think an SRA to the value of chairman of, it's not a payment. I think it's in my opinion, it would be an enabler. And if people don't feel like taking it, not everybody puts in for travel expenses. Some people do. We're allowed to put in for travel expenses, but you don't have to. So if you really felt it was wrong, then you wouldn't have to take it. But I think it was surprising. It was a bit of a shock to me to find how many hoops you had to jump through for, in my case, a pair of shoes. But it would be more. And if it were a gentleman who wanted to become mayor, I think everybody should be able to do it without any embarrassment. I'll see if there's any more speakers.
As a new councillor, I'm quite surprised that there wasn't already an allowance, and I would definitely support it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it's been quite a good debate, and I was sort of open-minded at the beginning of this, and I think I'm now sort of the mind that an SRA-type allowance would be a benefit, particularly as it does enable a more inclusive type situation, because there will be some that people like myself who would have to go and have my hair specially groomed if I was going on a mayoral event. But whilst it's a problem for me, it would potentially could be a much bigger problem for my wife, who might also have to come along with a long dress. And I'm not sure that a long dress for my wife, if I was lucky enough to be the mayor, would be an acceptable expenditure for a mayoral event. So, for somebody that is not of means, it's probably goes against them actually stepping forward to be mayor. And I think it could be a problem for them. So for that reason alone, I think I would probably support an SRA type arrangement.
I agree. It's a very interesting debate, and again, I got the privilege of sitting here as a deputy mayor and not being a man of means, as it were. In answer to Karen's point, is the last suit I bought was indeed for this role. I bought it in Westover. I went through 7 charity shops in Westover before I found one suitable for my size. So that I could carry out the functions of the deputy mayor. Madam Mayor points to a couple of things which are quite important and significant for us all to consider. One of those is the embarrassment. There is an embarrassment of not having the means to give justice to the dignity of the office. I'm reminded of when, in a far younger life, less hairy and a lot less weight, I had the privilege of accepting the Queen's Commission. And that itself carries with it a great deal of expense, depending upon what regiment you are commissioned into, which includes buying your own ceremonial dress. I had a discussion with the adjutant, without coffee, as regards how that was difficult for an individual that was not made, and reminded the adjutant of we used to buy a commission in the British Army, and if you were a man of means or title, then you got a commission and you could lead a regiment. Myself, I was commissioned from the ranks, and consequently I faced that same embarrassment of not being able to afford the ceremonial dress which is required to carry out all the functions that was expected of me. So therefore that limited my representation for my troops and for my regiment. So I think from the embarrassment side of things is that I myself don't claim expenses. travel or otherwise, never have done. The Office of the Mayor was very kind to point out where I could claim expenses, but my choice not to, whether it be for petrol or whatever. But it does leave that dilemma of how do you fulfil to the fullest of your ability the role of the Mayor and then the Deputy Mayor for the following year, as we've decided this evening. So I just would like to thank yourself, Madam Mayor, for bringing out that embarrassment and ask all to consider that people's means are not as your own, and it is the office which we're representing rather than ourselves. Thank you very much. Incidentally, I will be abstaining because it's a conflict of interest. Thank you.
I had another hand. Yes, David,
Thank you, Madam
there was
Mayor.
another one somewhere. If I call in a minute.
Can I just ask, we're saying that part of the reason behind this is to reduce the admin, less work for democratic services. I'm just concerned that effectively, for many people who are at least at the tax threshold, which basically your basic allowance puts you into that, they're therefore going to lose 25%. And I just wondered, relatively speaking, how much the tax payment could be offset by the reduced cost in democratic services work. In other words, the saving on one could be used to offset the other, because again, all these people we're talking about who may not be able to afford it, we don't want to end up giving them 25% less. It's not exactly helping them. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, are you able to answer that?
I have to say, I wouldn't get on the side of, I wouldn't argue the point that actually the reason this is, I mean, this wasn't brought by officers either, so I wouldn't say that the administrative burden is onerous in terms of processing the claims for out-of-pocket expenses. There is clearly a cost and a bureaucratic process in that mechanism, but I wouldn't say that that is an argument whether to have the allowance or not. It's about making that process probably smoother for the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor if you had an allowance in that it's paid automatically. But you're absolutely right, there is a potential loss, depending on the individual, of a tax liability.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I keep changing my mind about this. When, again, as part of the working group, and when I first saw it on the agenda, I thought, no, this is not a good idea. But then I heard the debate there, and I changed my mind because of exactly the reason I was talking about here. I personally think that we all should claim a certain amount of expenses, and because they are reported, and if you don't, you are putting those people who have to claim expenses slightly in an embarrassing situation to be the only people claiming expenses. Therefore, to be inclusive, I feel we should all do a little bit of that, even if we don't do everything. The idea of simplifying it so that officers don't have to do all the paperwork, I think is a good idea, but the tax reasons also, I think, that's something we've only just really discussed today. We didn't discuss that at the working group. So I do feel that some more work will have to be done to understand that, because of course the tax will be paid by the recipient, not by the Charter Trustees, and therefore the recipient may be getting less money for their shoes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I first read the item, I was minded to go for the allowance. And also, if a previous item had been carried, I think I would have made more sense. The Deputy Mayor had been in place first and then knew what was expected of him in that mayoral year. Then they would obviously take that allowance over the year, build up a pot of money which they would know they'd have to spend in order to fulfil their duties in the following year. Now, with where this sort of item is coming from in terms of buying items, which is going to be an upfront expense, I do wonder if the allowance will do that, continue paying tax, and then consider that's going to come out 12 portions per month. If someone's got to go out and someone's now coming, they're going to be mayor immediately, and they may have to go out and buy those sorts of items, then I think they would need that money immediately. So therefore, I'm more minded to go for the expenses system, to stay with that in order that, but encourage those people so that we are inclusive, and say if you do have to go out and buy those items, that you do that, and you do put in your expenses for those.
Actually, if you get I would be for the allowance, because I think it just simplifies things, and also your time is precious. You know, it is a privilege to be mayor, but it's still time-consuming, and when you could be earning money elsewhere. So I would go for the allowance for that reason alone. But also, if you're claiming it as an allowance, and you do go and buy a pair of shoes, yes, you've got your tax to pay, but you could then the shoes would be an expense of the business. Expense, you know, so there are expenses you could put down, so that would reduce the tax that you've got to pay anyway.
For you, Madam Mayor, I'm not sure that would be possible to write it off as expenses for the Charter Trustees. It's a public sector organisation, not a private organisation that would have that ability to do that.
No, I meant the individual. If you know, the expenses that you incur, you could offset against. If you give the money to the person untaxed, and then so if you give it to them as though they're self-employed, and they are liable for the tax, not the council, the person receiving it is liable for the tax, then you can start to put expenses down against your tax. I'm not sure about clothes, though, actually.
For you, Madam Mayor, I think this is something you probably need to, if this was to be agreed, we'd have to go away and consider, if that's okay.
Williams.
Yes, I assume you'd like me to sum up at this point. But I will say, when I was mayor of the Borough of Bournemouth before we became BCP, and it was slightly different. I chose not to claim expenses at the time and put it back into the mayoralty. Others before me, and subsequently I'm sure, had more difficult circumstances and felt the need to claim and needed to claim everything they were entitled to. So it really depends on the person in office as to the need. But that's all I'll say. May I suggest in summing up that we bring this to the vote, please?
So, if there's no more debate, I'd like to put the question. Those in favour of agreeing in principle the provision of an annual allowance for the Mayor and Deputy Mayor, or the Mayor or the Deputy Mayor, to be brought forward to the January budget meeting and for discussion by the working group in the meantime, the officers in the meantime. Those in favour, please raise your hand. And those against?
7.
That motion is lost. Abstentions, yes?
Yes, I abstain, and if I may, Madam Mayor, have that noted in the minutes. Thank you.
And Councillor Williams.
I'm doing awfully well, aren't I? The third item, I can see why Councillor Beasley's not here tonight. The third item, the Charter Trustees agreed a budget spend of approximately £5,000 to be taken from the reserves for additional links to be added to the mayoral chain of office. I, for one, am very supportive of this because having served as Mayor of Bournemouth, my name's still not on those chains. And so I have a vested interest and probably should have declared that in the beginning. However, there are a lot of subsequent mayors from my time, 2017 onwards, whose names aren't yet on the chains because there's no room, and that's what this expenditure is for. I don't know if you want to debate this or just go straight to the vote. Can I suggest, right, okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm clearly slightly unsighted on this. Are you saying that clearly you don't add a link each time there's a mayor?
No. There are a lot of spare links, or were a lot of spare links, and these will be spare links as well as the ones that need catching up for. So there's a row, and the row will contain a number of links, I believe. So it'll be many years before you need to do all this again.
If I may explain, I'm not wearing the mayoral chains. They're very heavy, and especially with lighter clothes, I haven't. This is the mayoress's chain, and the mayoress who's sitting over there is wearing a badge, or might be. I'm not sure, but this is the mayoress's chain. The actual chains, all the mayors, and they're called the chain gang, unofficially called the chain gang, and all the mayors of all the towns in the whole of Dorset and Hampshire, which we get to meet, they all have links on their chains, and some of them go back. Dorchester, for example, goes back thousands of years. They have the names of all the mayors. They become very heavy. I believe they're double-sided on the mayor's chains, and we just need more links because there are more mayors. It would be, and to my mind, we've got the budget. I can see no good reason why we wouldn't do it, but everyone's entitled to an opinion. So, would you like to speak?
Just to clarify as well, we don't continuously add more and more chains to the chain of office. It would just become unwieldy. So when you're after the meeting in the mayor's parlour, there are older links that are displayed in there. This is part of the history, the ceremonial process of the mayoralty. We've had a few years without them, purely because we need to add a new link, if you like, a row of links into the chain. So this is catching up with that particular process. So it is part of the history and tradition, and as I said, it's not there to just add more weight to the chain itself.
And if I may, Madam Mayor, you don't, up until now, you've never been paid as the mayor, and it's a reward, if you like, as part of the privilege of being the mayor, to have your name engraved on the mayoral chains for all to see in the future.
So if there's no more debate, I'd put... Oh, George, do you want to speak?
I'd just like to touch on Lawrence's point. This has already been put to the trustees and went to the working group, and we had a requirement under due diligence and governance, etc., to get free quotes, etc. And that was all taken care of, so the cost is what the cost is. In reality, what we're looking at is upholding the history and the tradition of the office of the mayor, which goes back in, for instance, Christchurch's case goes back unbroken and is recorded to the 13th century. Bournemouth is a lot younger here, so otherwise we would have Marley's ghost chains festooned around the building. To Lawrence's point, it is a mark of that tradition because, again, it is the office of the mayor and not the individual. And Poole, for instance, managed to retain their chains during the Civil War when Cromwell was melting it down for the war effort, simply because, by sleight of hand, they marked it up as belonging to somebody else. But in reality, this historical note is recorded on the chains for a reason, because that weight of history and tradition you wear around your shoulders when you represent the office of the Mayor for Bournemouth. So I am in support of authorising the budget of £5,000 for the addition of the links to the current chain. In the same way, if I have the good fortune in a decade or two, when we look to seek to have further mayor chains, as we may well do, the purchase of those from the trustees, because that's what we're here for. We are trustees to the office of the Mayor of Bournemouth and the tradition, which is the weight of our shoulders, and in some cases, literally. Thank you.
So we'll move to the vote. All those in favour of this small expenditure, please raise your hands. And those against? So that motion is carried, and we should go ahead and... sorry. Any abstentions? Yes, one. Ladies and gentlemen, I should have said at the beginning, I had a crib sheet which I didn't see, and I should have made all sorts of announcements about this being broadcast and so on, and how we take votes, and I do apologise for not doing it in the correct manner. Before I move on to the next item on the agenda, which is to ask Matthew Filmer, the responsible financial officer, to present the report, the finance update, I'd just like to say I missed out in my communications reminding you to, if you possibly can, to come to the Remembrance Day service on the 12th of November. It's a difficult year. It's been a difficult year for the world, and it would be wonderful if we can have a good turnout. And I'd be really grateful for support. And I've written, as you know, wrote to everybody, and I've had quite a lot of replies from the people who are not here. So if those of you who could come do, it will be really appreciated by me. And we'll move now to item 6 on the agenda, which is the finance update. Matthew.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, Charter Trustees. So this is the mid-year budget update for the end of September. And I'll draw everyone's attention to Appendix A, which details the budget for the Charter Trustees, but also the forecast outturn for 23-24. We're currently forecasting an underspend of £6,450. And when you look at Appendix A, that's not particularly clear. The reason for that is we're using reserves to support this year's budget. So if you look at the bottom of Appendix A, we set the budget with an anticipation to use £10,000 worth of reserves. We're now looking to draw down only £3,550. And the reason, because we're now forecasting an underspend, so we're not going to need to use as many reserves as we previously anticipated. And the underspend is mostly driven around underspends in hospitality and out-of-pocket expenses that we've referenced earlier. The report also highlights the need for a budget working group, which we carry out every year in advance of the January budget setting meeting. So we're looking to get that in the diaries for December. And that meeting will look at the recharges between the council and the Charter Trustees. We'll look at the tax base, so the number of properties we levy council tax at Bournemouth, and that impact it has on potential council tax precepts. And we'll potentially discuss some of the use of reserves if we want to support any special events or activities. The last thing I just wanted to pick up, Madam Mayor, which isn't mentioned in the report, is the conclusion of the audit of the 22-23 accounts. They got a clean bill of health, all signed off, no issues, and they're currently on the Charter Trustees website for the public to view. So I'll take any questions, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Matt. Is there anybody wanting to ask any questions or make any comments?
Madam Mayor, can I just ask for a point of clarification? The recommendation here is that we note this. Does that therefore mean that we are accepting this budget? Because that's a very different term, isn't it? I want to be reassured that at some point we may be able to actually challenge the amounts of figures in this budget when that time comes. I don't want to reach a situation down track where somebody says to me, it's already been agreed.
For you, Madam Mayor. So the budget was agreed back in January this year for this financial year. So the next iteration of the budget, in which you can debate around some of those items, will be January 2024. Of course, if you want input into that budget, we'd encourage you to attend the Civic Budget Working Group, and that's an opportunity for Charter Trustees to set out their views on some of the budget items.
Councillor Sharon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm grateful that my co-councillor asked his question first. I was going to do a slightly more roundabout approach to asking about whether or not we could challenge these figures. I mean, for example, we've still got £10,000 in for the coronation. I don't know if we're anticipating the death of the monarch. But I'm not quite sure. You know, there are things like that. And also just the whole... My reflection on this section on the budget setting is that it's a very technocratic process that we've been asked to comment on rather than any of the principles around the budget setting and how much money should be given over to this the range of duties and activities. And I'm heartened to hear that we will have an opportunity come the January meetings to discuss this at more depth, and it would seem that my points would perhaps be best kept for then. Thank you.
For you, Madam Mayor, what I would say is I'd encourage any Charter Trustees to attend that working group so that we avoid, when we come to set the budget in January, going through line by line and trying to agree a budget at that point. It's better to do it in advance, pre-January. So if anyone has an opinion on those budget lines, please attend that civic working group, because that's the opportunity that you can shape the budget going forward.
So is that...
Well, Madam Chair, it assumes that we know who that group is, and I have absolutely no idea who that group is.
I'm sorry, I didn't... Can you just repeat that, please, Councillor Pat?
For you, Madam Mayor, the question was about the attendees of the civic work group. So traditionally it would be the mayor, the deputy mayor and the budget signatories, and then we would open it up for volunteers, and that would be done via email prior to that meeting.
If I may, a brief further question on that. Do the people who volunteer, do they have voting rights?
It's a working group, so it's a non-decision meeting, but it's usually informed by the consensus of the meeting. So it seeks ideas and thoughts, and clearly we've had COVID, as we said. So this has gone through a bit of an iteration, this working group arrangement. But clearly the core is defined in our rules in terms of the mayor, the deputy mayor, the past mayors, I think possibly, the budget signatories, but we do open it out for all other members. So I think it's operationally it's been a fair discussion around those issues, but there are the core members of that, but it is informed by those who attend. So, and again, Matt, I think it has been virtual previously. It's a virtual working group, so you can join that as a virtual attendee and contribute to that working group.
For you, Madam Mayor, just to add, at that working group we also discussed council tax levels as well. So we need to get a direction of travel. If we say we were to increase the expenditure of the Charter Trustees, that may cause the council tax precept to increase. So we need to take that into consideration for the working group as well.
If I just might say that I'm not an accountant, I'm married to one and I've got 2 children who are accountants, and I find these almost impossible to understand. And I think somebody mentioned the coronation contingency, and I asked a couple of questions before we came to this meeting. I don't understand how it is. Government finance accounts are very specific, very arcane, and you've got to have a different sort of mind to understand them. And I'm not sure that an online discussion on this is the best thing. I'd like to know what other people think. I think there's something about being in a room and seeing people nodding and being able to put your hand up and ask another question. It's complicated. We've got a lot of new people, and we've got quite a lot of old people who don't understand it, like me. And this was all put in the very first year of the Charter Trustees, and within a year we were locked down, so we didn't get together to discuss any of it. I wouldn't disagree with it. I know it's been done properly and it's properly audited, but I think the understanding of it is complicated, and I think it might well be worth considering a meeting where we're in a room together, if enough people think that's necessary, or a hybrid meeting for those who don't want to come in. So I'll put that question, see if it's possible. But I would certainly appreciate it, because looking down here, there's also a really difficult tension between the Charter Trustees and the BCP Council, who owns the building, and we're using the rooms of it, but actually no money actually it's an accountancy activity. No money actually changes hands, but it's complicated. And so I think it needs explaining.
To pick up the point, money does exchange. The Charter Trustees are a separate legal entity to the council. The Charter Trustees have their own bank account as well. So there is actual cash transfers between the council and the Charter Trustees. Just wanted to pick up on that point.
For the sake of those listening online, I apologise if I said there isn't money changing hands, so that was wrong, and I apologise. But I still think we needed, those of us who don't understand it needed explaining, and those who do understand it don't need to come to the session.
Madam Mayor, we can certainly facilitate a hybrid type meeting with those who wish to attend in person, to be in a room, but allowing anyone else to join online if they wish to do so.
If I may, I'd welcome that suggestion, because I think we have so many new members here. It's important, and also with COVID and the lockdowns, it made it very awkward. I remember a little spat in the newspapers as regards one of the outcomes of such a meeting. It's very useful for the trustees, and again, the word is trustees, to understand what you're in trust of, which is the office of the mayor and its continuity. And by all means, it is absolutely right that you should scrutinise, and you should come up with ideas for moving it into the 21st century and moving away from the arcane ideas of claiming expenses, or buying your own sword, whatever it might well be. However, I think that's the place that those discussions for the trustees can come to, bring to the table, and then the officers can actually work with that, with the budget, based upon the precept which is charged to our residents. And it gives the residents also an insight into what they've been charged that extra £2-3 a year, each household, for what they're getting for their money. So I'd very much welcome, Madam Mayor, the suggestion by Democratic Services that we have a hybrid meeting, but it is actually in person, whereby line by line this can be discussed. It would advance my own knowledge of how trustees work and what the lines mean, and actually where the greater majority of the costs are actually involved. Thank you very much.
I'm pleased about that, and there being no further items for... there's a...
Well, I just really want to labour the point that apparently I'm a trustee of something in excess of £150,000. And at some point I want to question whether or not that £150,000 is actually appropriate. Now, I understand that this report is a kind of review of where we are with the current budget and this projected underspend. I get all of that. What I'm trying to flag up through you, Madam Mayor, is that we will be challenging this because £150,000, which has this arcane caveat with it, that it has to have some kind of separate precept to it, which just seems to me to be archaic. At some point, that has to be challenged. And if this isn't the appropriate time, then forgive me, but I will find an appropriate time to do it.
Councillor Canavan, we will have, the appropriate time is January, when the budget for next year will be set, and we will definitely have the meetings for challenging that in a timely fashion, so that and it's quite right, we all need to be able to understand it and challenge it as is necessary. So, if there's no further debate on this or anything else, I formally close the meeting. Thank you very much for all coming, and invite you back to the parlour. I can't offer you an alcoholic drink because we agreed in principle that we're not going to encourage anyone to drink and drive. So come back and have a non-alcoholic drink and a bit of a relax and a bit of a get-together. Thank you very much.